In 2003, Threshold Entertainment released their first animated film in the form of Foodfight. While the film was largely panned by critics due to its oddly placed adult humor and wasted voice talent, it did receive some praise for its animation style, which combined the squash and stretch style of pre-blank code Disney cartoons with fully 3D animation that was still in its infancy at the time. More importantly, it was a huge box office success, which was largely attributed to the presence of many recognizable food product mascots. This made other film studios eager to capitalize on what they saw as Hollywood's next big trend. This culminated in two highly ambitious and constantly rivaling cinematic universes centered around the various mascots of two of the biggest breakfast cereal companies in the world, Kellogg's and General Mills. This is the War of Cereal Cinematic Universes. The history of Kellogg's in film actually dates back to almost a decade prior to Foodfight. In 1994, Sony released The Road to Wellville, which told a fictionalized story of John Harvey Kellogg and his eccentric operations at the Battle Creek Sanitarium. The higher-ups at Kellogg's worried this film painted their co-founder in a negative light, and worked tirelessly to come up with a way to change the general public's association between Kellogg's and film. In 1997, they teamed up with Ted Sarandos to create Breakflix, a rental service that would ship boxes of Kellogg's cereal with DVDs included directly to your door. The service became a massive success and gave Kellogg's the necessary funding to produce their own original films. And once Foodfight released in 2003 and General Mills announced their acquisition of Big Idea Entertainment, they knew they had to strike while the iron was hot. Prolific Hollywood director Alan Smithee was brought on to helm a Frosted Flakes movie that depicted Tony the Tiger as a former football coach turned cereal maker who's pulled out of retirement to help a struggling football team beat the odds and win their championship series with the help of Frosted Flakes cereal providing the team with superior energy and focus. Although Kellogg's wanted Hugh Grant to play Tony the Tiger, Smithee wanted an actual retired football player to bring authenticity to the role. And having previously directed the made-for-TV film The O.J. Simpson Story, he knew who would be the perfect fit. O.J. Simpson was no stranger to acting, of course. Most infamously, he portrayed the T-800 in James Cameron's 1984 sci-fi flop, The Terminator. However, given his controversial murder trial and acquittal, his casting as Tony the Tiger was polarizing. As such, most of the marketing focused on the supposedly revolutionary CGI and motion capture technology being implemented to transform O.J. Simpson into Tony the Tiger. This would come back to haunt them, as when the film released in 2005, critics and audiences alike skewered the film's visual effects as seemingly unfinished. Smithee confirmed this to be the case, as Kellogg's rushed the film's production in order to release the same day as Buzz's Beatitudes, a Honey Nut Cheerios movie, the first film in the General Mills cinematic universe. While Frosted Flakes did beat Buzz's Beatitudes at the box office, it also had a significantly higher budget, and failed to make back even half of that budget. Breakflix also saw a decrease in revenue in the following years due to the transition between DVDs and Blu-ray discs. Thus, in 2007, Breakflix launched the Breakflix streaming service, which allowed customers to watch dozens of films online via a monthly subscription. It was moderately successful at first, although many customers expecting to watch films from the General Mills cinematic universe, due to the breakfast theming, were left disappointed and canceled their subscriptions after their first month. This issue only grew over the next 5 years, as the GMCU became more popular and Kellogg's lacked any original content to compete with it. Alan Smithee had spent every day since the initial release of Frosted Flakes trying to fix the visual effects for a theatrical re-release, and thus had not begun work on any new films for Kellogg's. Jerry Seinfeld, upset over General Mills rejecting his pitch for a Buzz the Bee movie, had reached out to Kellogg's about making a film about the creation of Pop-Tarts. But this would not materialize for almost 20 years. Just as Breckflix was reaching its breaking point, Alan Smithee showed the higher-ups at Kellogg's his finished version of Frosted Flakes in 2013. They were so impressed with the new visual effects that they agreed to release this new version of the film on the Breckflix streaming service, which would be soon rebranded to fully distinguish itself as the Kellogg streaming service. And thus, Breckflix was rebranded to Cornflix, and Frosted Flakes Great Edition was released as the first Cornflix original film. While audiences were blown away by the finished visual effects, they only made the narrative flaws and poor acting stand out even more. Although that didn't matter when thousands of people worldwide are watching it anyway, because a 1-month subscription to Cornflix is cheaper than a movie theater ticket. At least it was at one point. The name change to Cornflix was not without its controversy, as many people accidentally ended up on Pornflix when trying to access Cornflix. Pornflix would eventually capitalize on this by making various Kellogg's porn parody films, starting with Frosted Cakes. They even made a porn parody of The Road to Wellville called The Chode to Swellville. This, of course, brought more attention to The Road to Wellville, which upset the higher-ups at Kellogg so much that they announced 3 future movies to be directed by Alan Smithee as part of the Kellogg's cinematic universe for the Cornflix streaming service, all without speaking to Alan Smithee beforehand. These films would consist of a Rice Krispies movie, a Fruit Loops movie, and a biopic that would tell the true story of John Harvey Kellogg, along with his brother, Will Keith Kellogg, who was omitted entirely from The Road to Wellville. Despite the surprise of this announcement, Alan Smithee got right to work on the Rice Krispies movie, which would depict Snap, Crackle, and Pop as aspiring cooks living under a totalitarian regime that prohibits flavor, culminating in the trio creating the iconic Rice Krispies treats and leading a revolution to overthrow the regime. Smithee was insistent on casting an established trio in the lead roles, and said he wouldn't be opposed to gender-blind casting, as some of the most popular casting choices for the General Mills cinematic universe were female actresses portraying characters previously depicted as male. Although Three Ninjas stars Michael Triner, Max Elliott Slade, and Chad Power expressed interest in the film, Smithee couldn't find the right fit, so he elected to shoot the entire film without leads, and then digitally insert the leads into the film once he found what he was looking for. This would, of course, mean that the Rice Krispies movie would not meet its intended 2015 release, so Kellogg's pressured Smithee to rush out the Fruit Loops movie to fill that spot. This film, titled Toucan Sam and the Quest for the Indigo Loops, followed Toucan Sam and his nephews Pewee, Susie, and Louie going on a treasure hunt for the lost Indigo Loops, a new flavor of Fruit Loops that is said to be even more delicious than regular Fruit Loops. Kellogg's even added indigo-colored loops to the cereal for a limited time to coincide with the film's release. For the voice of Toucan Sam, Smithee specifically wanted an actor who was both British and gay, so he cast Sir Ian McKellen. Veteran voice actors Frank Welker and Jim Cummings reprised their roles as Pewee and Susie from the original commercials, although Louie went mysteriously uncredited. Critics called the film a mediocre adventure film that's only reason to exist is to sell cereal, but the voice performances received some praise. On January 26th, 2017, Alan Smithee watched the premiere of Riverdale on the CW. By the end of the premiere, he knew who his Snap, Crackle, and Pop would be. The next day, the cast for Rice Krispies Civil War was announced, led by Madeline Pesh as Snap, Lily Reinhart as Crackle, and Camila Mendez as Pop. Later that same year, the film was released. While critics called it the worst Kellogg's production yet, audiences loved it for its campy tone, sapphic undertones, and perceived commentary on the state of the film industry under the blank code, which Smithee denies being intentional, because if it were his intention, we would have killed him. Rice Krispies Civil War became the biggest Corn Flakes premiere at the time, and has not left Corn Flakes' top 10 since its release. Despite never being given an official theatrical release, some independent movie theaters regularly host midnight screenings of the film, often in a double feature pairing with Riverdale to Archie and Back Again, the 2023 remake of Archie to Riverdale and Back Again, with all the Riverdale cast members reprising their roles from the show. By the time Rice Krispies Civil War released, Alan Smithee was already hard at work on the highly anticipated Kellogg Brothers biopic. He was adamant about casting actual brothers for the film, and while many famous pairs of brothers in Hollywood auditioned, Smithee ultimately cast Chris Evans as John Harvey Kellogg and Scott Evans as Will Keith Kellogg. Released theatrically in summer 2018 and on Corn Flakes in fall 2018, Don't Get Cocky, the Kellogg Brothers story, told a dramatically fictionalized version of the lives of the Kellogg brothers, in which they butt heads over their differing food philosophies, with John Harvey preferring bland nutrition and Will Keith preferring empty flavor, but coming together in the end to make a new cereal that's nutritious and delicious, achieving wild success before John Harvey Kellogg's death in an unexplained yogurt machine accident. To appeal more to kids and fans of the previous KCU films, Smithee added Cornelius Rooster, voiced by Morgan Freeman, as a narrator, along with cameos from the mascots previously featured in films. Historians called the film entirely unrecognizable from the public record, while parents complained about having to look up the yogurt machine part in response to questions from their confused children. Despite this, the film did decently well at the box office due to the lack of a General Mills film to compete with that year. Of course, John Harvey Kellogg's undeniable quirky nature, and the unfortunate and somehow accidental triple entendre of the title, only added more fuel to the fire at Corn Flakes, and they quickly released a follow-up to The Chode de Swellville, parodying the new biopic, titled Get Cock, the Swell Hog Brothers story. This was the last straw for Kellogg's, and they changed the name of Corn Flakes back to Breck Flakes. In the midst of all that, Alan Smithee was working on a Apple Jacks film for a 2019 release. Simply titled Apple Jacks, for some reason spelt J-A-X, the film saw Apple and Cinnamon putting aside their differences to solve a mystery surrounding a series of impossible cereal-related heists, seemingly lampooning the Chip and Tricks films from the General Mills cinematic universe. People were initially concerned with this film's announcement, considering that Cinnamon was depicted in Apple Jacks commercials as a Jamaican stereotype. Smithee did, however, slightly alleviate these concerns by casting Naomi Harris, an actress of Jamaican descent, in the role. Apple was played by Woody Harrelson, and the two were praised for their unexpectedly great chemistry when the film released. The film as a whole was moderately successful on the Breckflix platform, although critics deemed it one of the lesser entries of the KCU, stating the material failed to rise to the level of fun being had by the two leads, and felt like a cheap imitation of the Chip and Tricks films. Up until this point, Breakflix had seen a steady rise in subscribers over the years, but the KCU films, with the exception of Rice Krispies Civil War, weren't what was drawing people to the platform. People mostly subscribed to watch other films that Breakflix had the license to stream for a limited time. General Mills, in the midst of a cinematic comeback with hits like Lucky, A Charmed Life, and Puffs, briefly offered Kellogg's a deal to license GMCU films to be streamed on Breakflix, but Kellogg's rejected the offer, stating that to accept such an offer would be to admit defeat. Lucky for them, the streaming industry would soon be one of the few industries to benefit from the global COVID-19 pandemic. And the timing couldn't be better, as March 2020 saw the release of the riskiest KCU film yet, Pringles the Musical. Although directed by Alan Smithee like all previous KCU films, the idea of Pringles the Musical came from the mind of musical comedian Bo Burnham, who wrote the entire screenplay and all the songs as a joke after the miserable movie makers rejected his coming-of-age film 8th Grade. He already had a good working relationship with Kellogg's, as they had streaming deals with him and many other comedians to produce comedy specials for the Breakflix platform. So, when he jokingly pitched the idea of a Pringles Mafia musical, Kellogg's immediately greenlit the project and handed the script off to Alan Smithee to direct. The film depicts Julius Pringles, played by Daniel Radcliffe, as a poor, aspiring chip maker whose attempts to hit it big with his canned chip innovation end up dragging him into a war between two mafia families, led by Nick Offerman and Peter Dinklage, who are seeking control of a potato chip factory at the border of their territories. After a shockingly bloody war, Julius is able to escape from various hitmen sent to clean him up, including Bo Burnham himself in a cameo, pass critical incriminating evidence to the FBI, free the city from the criminals, and acquire the chip factory for himself to start his dream business. Critics called this film the dumbest food-based film yet, but audiences adored the film for its admittedly silly but undeniably unique premise and committed performances from the cast, particularly Daniel Radcliffe. The film was released on the Breakflix platform the same day as a documentary series about former presidential candidate Joe Exotic, titled Tony the Tiger King. A confusing title, given that his name was Joe and not Tony, but Kellogg's thought it would help with brand synergy. It did not, and the many audience members that may have binged the series in lockdown instead flocked to Pringles the Musical, which basically did for movies what Animal Crossing New Horizons and Among Us did for video games during this time. Daniel Radcliffe would eventually reprise the role of Julius Pringles in a stage adaptation of the film, and rumor has it a sequel is in the works, with Sabrina Carpenter and Pringle Leo reportedly reprising their roles from the Super Bowl commercial Love at First Bite. With Breakflix subscribers at an all-time high, Kellogg's was eager for Alan Smithee to make a big crossover film with all the mascots previously featured in KCU films. However, after yearly releases since 2017, Smithee was experiencing burnout. He had put so much passion and effort into every KCU entry so far, but he couldn't do it this time. I mean, he made a crossover film, but it wasn't exactly up to his typical standard. Released both theatrically and on Breakflix simultaneously on July 16th, 2021, the same day as Space Jam: A New Legacy and Nickelodeon Basketball the Movie, Kellogg's Bases Loaded had a premise nearly identical to the original Space Jam, with aliens invading Earth and battling the mascots in a sports game, only basketball is swapped out for baseball. Will Keith Kellogg assembles all the previously featured mascots, as well as some new additions including Frosted Mini-Wheats, Crave Chocovores, and Pop-Tarts, to defeat the aliens in baseball and allow them to spread the joy of Kellogg's food products across the galaxy. Critics and audiences alike maligned the film as the laziest KCU entry yet, saying it made Space Jam: A New Legacy look like a pre-blank code masterpiece, although it was moderately more successful than Nickelodeon Basketball the Movie. Not successful enough, however, to warrant continuing the KCU any further, with the exception of the aforementioned sequel to Pringles the Musical, rumored to be in development. Kellogg's would continue to distribute plenty of Breakfast original movies and TV shows, not directly tied to Kellogg's brands, with the exception of product placement, such as Eggo waffles being prominently featured in Stranger Things, a show many fans theorize to be a secret KCU entry. Although, there was one more Kellogg's film to be released on the Breakfast platform. Released on April 30th, 2024, just 20 days after the death of O.J. Simpson, Jerry Seinfeld's Unfrosted, a fictionalized take on the invention of Pop-Tarts, was released. And the less said about that, the better. While the Kellogg's cinematic universe may be effectively dead, its legacy will live on forever on the Breakfast platform. Arguably, the biggest success for Kellogg's was the biggest failure for General Mills. Kellogg's, or more accurately, Alan Smithy, knew when to quit.